that a dog is trying to find his savior, to find his rescuer, even when his paws were bloody and battered. He didn't want to stop. Eventually, tired, hungry, and in pain, he collapsed in a warehouse. Soon the owner of the warehouse heard a noise and found him. Luckily, the owner had a kind heart. When he saw the dog's bloody paws, he felt very sorry for him, so he rushed to treat his wounds. He kept his own dog with him. He took care of the dog. The next day, the dog was looking great. After expressing his gratitude, he continued to run in the direction of the little girl. Apparently, he was running fast this time. He had the feeling that the little girl was not happy. It turns out that George had brought his daughter here to look for her brother. But it's okay to stay here for a day or two. But he didn't want to stay here for a long time. So George and her brother had a heated argument. They parted on bad terms. George is a man. He knew how hard it was to live under the thumb of another, so he decided to use the money that his brother-in-law had asked him to collect. He'd settle his daughter down first, then he'd get a job to make up for the money. So he took his daughter to the hotel. But when they arrived at the front desk to check in, the car was stolen. All their luggage and money were in the car. Now the father and daughter had nothing. Now it's getting late. George started yelling and screaming. He's trying to vent his frustration and frustration. The little girl, who had never seen her father like this before, was terrified. But no matter how much she called out to him, he couldn't hear her. He just yelled and yelled. The little girl could only sit on the ground and cry. When he saw his daughter crying, George calmed down. He decided to go to his brother and ask him to take care of the little girl. He asked his brother to take care of the little girl when he found a job and settled down, and then take the little girl away. When the little girl heard this, she thought it was her father's excuse, that he didn't want her anymore, so she left without looking back. By the time George got off the phone and realized his daughter wasn't there, the little girl was nowhere to be found. George looked everywhere, but he couldn't find anything. When he was completely broken down, he leaned against the wall and cried. The dog was watching him from a distance. The dog had followed him for over 10,000 kilometers. George was shocked. But what's the point of the dog coming back? And now his daughter was gone. Just then the dog barked at him twice. George knew he was going to follow him. And soon enough, the dog led George to the little girl. The dog led George to the little girl. The little girl was so happy to see that both the dog and her father had found her. George rushed forward to apologize to his daughter. He told her that he would find a way to solve all her problems. So the next day, George took it upon himself to call his great uncle. And of course, his brother-in-law got mad and hammered him. Seeing her father beaten up like this, the little girl was trembling with fear. But her brother-in-law told her, "Don't follow her father anymore. He's a loser and can't do anything right. If he can't even take care of himself, how can he take care of you?" At that moment, the dog rushed out and barked at brother-in-law. This scared brother-in-law to death. But he had a new idea. After all, the dog was a hunting dog, and his favorite hobby is dogfighting. If the dog wins, then he would never come back to trouble the father and daughter again. If he loses, I'll get custody of the little girl. He didn't give George time to react. He just turned around and walked out of the house. As soon as he got back in the car, brother-in-law called the dogfighting ring. He asked the owner to arrange for the dog to lose, so that he could win a lot of money by placing a big bet on the fight and get custody of his niece. The next day, without knowing it, the father and daughter had no choice. They had no choice but to bring the dog to the fight. George was afraid that his daughter would be frightened by the bloodshed inside, so he told her to wait outside. He took the dog to the race himself. With the sound of the opening bell, the battle of life and death began. But the little girl was worried when she heard the dogs fighting. She didn't want the dog to get hurt, so she rushed in without hesitation. Seeing a child barging in, the referee immediately stopped the fight. George rushed to cover his daughter's eyes. He saw how sad she looked, so he made a decision. He came to his brother-in-law and knocked him to the ground. The dog knew what he was doing. He immediately rushed forward and tore his brother-in-law's clothes. This scared brother-in-law to death. He tried his best to run away, but the dog didn't give him a chance. He locked his mouth around his throat. Then George came over. He told him not to bother them again. How could brother-in-law not agree? He immediately gave in. He said it was all over. He said he wouldn't bother them again. The dog then let go of his mouth. Then the father and daughter took the dog and left the house. They were ready for a brighter life. So a dog knows how to return the favor of a drop of water. But what about people?